The now world-renowned teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg famously refuses to travel anywhere by air because of the massive carbon dioxide emissions that modern jet airliners cause. When she arrived on a catamaran in Lisbon, Portugal, en route to the 2019 COP25 climate conference in Madrid in Spain, she was asked whether she expected everyone else in the world to hop on a boat instead of a plane whenever they wanted to travel between two countries separated by a large body of water. Her response was this. She said, "I'm not travelling like this because I want everyone to do so. I'm doing this to sort of send the message that it's impossible to live sustainably today, and that needs to change. It needs to become much easier." So, on the basis that human beings are very unlikely to give up their right to travel freely whenever they choose, and very few of them will choose to do so by sea, then one of the many questions that has to be asked is, can there ever be such a thing as a sustainable aviation industry? Hello and welcome to Just Have a Think. You might assume that it was the Americans or perhaps the Chinese who took the most flights abroad in 2018. But in fact, data from the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, shows that it was my own compatriots, the Brits, who flew abroad more than any other nationality with a total of 126.2 million flights. The IATA also optimistically tells us that airlines have cut average emissions per passenger journey in half compared to 1990 levels. Sounds great, doesn't it? But according to Tim Johnson, director of the Aviation Environment Federation, UK CO2 emissions from aviation have doubled over the last 20 to 25 years and are predicted to grow into the future. And the simple reason, of course, is that although engine and fuel efficiency have indeed halved average emissions per passenger, there are vastly more passengers flying now than there were in 1990, so the overall emissions figure is actually increasing. 4.5 billion passengers flew to their worldwide destinations in 2018, and that number's growing at about 5% a year, which means passenger numbers will double every 15 to 20 years. That statistic is driven by massive subsidies that mean, for example, that it's cheaper to fly 600 miles from London to Geneva in Switzerland than it is to travel 200 miles by train from London to Manchester in the UK. Before any technological solution is even considered, the insanity of our current pricing system has to change urgently. But let's face it, we all live in the real world, so even if the price of a plane ticket does increase to reflect the cost of the flight, it's still unlikely to completely curb our insatiable desire for air travel. And that means we do have to consider how technology can help us reduce the carbon emissions that come as a result of our flying addiction. The airline industry uses kerosene as its fossil fuel of choice to power its jet engines because with kerosene you get plenty of bang for your buck, about 43 megajoules per kilogram to be precise, but the price we pay for such enormous energy density is that a round trip from New York to London produces the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as the average household produces heating their home for an entire year. In fact, according to the EU, if global aviation was a country, it would rank in the top 10 emitters. Finding an alternative propulsion method for planes has been a research and development journey not dissimilar to the transition from internal combustion engine road vehicles to electric vehicles. All the well-established airliners and engine manufacturers are looking towards either lithium-ion batteries or hydrogen fuel cell technologies to provide their power source. According to this report by Stuart Clark for The Guardian just this week, Rolls-Royce has partnered with Airbus and Siemens to develop a demonstration short-haul plane called the E-Fan-X. The E-Fan-X is a hybrid plane, a bit like a flying Prius, with only one of the aircraft's 4 engines being replaced with an electric engine running off lithium-ion batteries. Developers say the E-Fan-X is on course to begin test flights in 2021. Israeli firm Aviation has launched the world's first commercial all-electric passenger aircraft, albeit in prototype form. They say their plane will carry 9 passengers for up to 650 miles at 10,000 feet and 276 miles an hour and will enter service in 2022. Boeing is also getting in on the act, partnering with Zunum Aero and using an engine turbine from France's Safran to power an electric motor for a hybrid craft. up in the Orkneys in the UK, a project led by Zero Avia called the High Flyer is developing another 6-seater shuttle aircraft. This one's been awarded £5.3 million of UK government funding and will culminate in a 300-mile demonstration flight out of Orkney by 2022. And low-cost airline EasyJet is working with Wright Electric, saying it'll start using electric aircraft in its regular services by 2027. All of which is extremely encouraging for short-haul flights all the way up to about 1,000 miles. But 80% of the aviation industry's emissions come from long haul, and that's where battery-powered electric planes hit the buffers. Because compared to the 43 megajoules per kilogram that kerosene delivers, lithium-ion batteries can only produce a comparatively paltry 1 megajoule per kilogram. And that means you need an awful lot of them to provide enough power to keep a plane in the air, and they're pretty heavy, and because weight is a crucial factor governing how much power a plane needs, you quite quickly reach a maximum practicable weight for the plane, which equates to enough battery power to get you about a third of the way across the Atlantic. And as this stunning piece of insight in Flight Global article explains, power failure in mid-flight is a major risk engineers want to avoid, which strikes me as an extremely reasonable point of view. So what's to be done? Well, it turns out the answer might be to take a bit of inspiration from the now-retired Space Shuttle program. The fuel that filled up those famous orange rocket boosters was liquid hydrogen with a pure oxygen oxidizer. The shuttle scientists weren't interested in pushing hydrogen through a fuel cell to produce power in an electrolytic circuit. No, they just wanted to make it explode with as much controlled violence as they could possibly muster. So they basically allowed the liquid hydrogen to come into contact with the pure oxygen and then lit a big match underneath it all. And that pretty much did the trick. And in that respect, hydrogen is an extremely good candidate. At around 130 megajoules per kilogram of energy, it's 3 times as energy dense as Jet A kerosene, which means much less fuel weight on an aircraft. Potentially, liquid hydrogen can be used as a direct alternative fuel source to kerosene in a modern jet engine with relatively little engine modification. In fact, gas turbines are already in use in industrial production facilities in various parts of the world that use a 50-50 hydrogen-methane mix. Hydrogen is also more flammable than kerosene, which means potentially a more efficient lean burn combustion, producing ultra-low nitrous oxide emissions. And now, a new research programme led by Cranfield University has announced an initiative that they call Enable H2, which stands for Enabling Cryogenic Hydrogen-Based CO2-Free Air Transport. Enable H2 is funded by €4 million from the European Horizon 2020 project, which is an €80 billion fund driving scientific research and innovation. According to Cranfield University's Dr. Bobby Setti, liquid hydrogen has the potential to completely decarbonise civil aviation. At the moment, opinion is split in the industry, mainly due to the much higher cost associated with producing the hydrogen and the infrastructure required. At ambient temperatures, hydrogen is a gas, so it has to be cryogenically chilled to get it into liquid form, and that takes a massive amount of energy, which our current renewable infrastructure isn't yet set up to handle. It's also a very volatile element, which means it can't be stored in the wings, as with conventional transport aircraft. Most liquid and hydrogen aircraft designs store the fuel in the fuselage, which means the plane has to be larger, and that potentially means more resistance or drag. But because the hydrogen aircraft would have about 1/3 of the fuel weight, a jumbo jet-sized plane at takeoff would weigh about 270,000 kilos instead of 360,000 kilos, and that weight saving would go a long way to compensating for the larger surface area of the aircraft. There are also concerns around the safety of such a volatile element, but unlike kerosene, if there was ever a spill, LH2 quickly vaporises and disperses without the same kind of contamination and threat to health of airport staff. Dr. Setti's view is that as soon as conventional fuel prices, emission taxation scenarios and the sheer necessity of transformation are taken into account, the cost of transition is going to look remarkably modest for such a fundamental long-term solution. The civil aviation industry is beginning to seriously consider the LH2 model. In fact, the project advisory board of Enable H2 includes representatives from all these big industry players. So when can we expect to see these revolutionary new carbon-free long-haul aircraft filling our skies? Well, don't hold your breath just yet, because best estimates are that it could take more than a decade to bring a fully functional commercial version of one of these planes to market. In the meantime, well, better fuel efficiency and fuselage design, coupled with a more efficient air traffic control system, may provide a 10 to 15% reduction in CO2 emissions. But the biggest and quickest impact that we can make as a society is the one we looked at right at the top of the programme, which is to apply a pricing structure that doesn't contain huge subsidies and that accurately represents the carbon cost involved. And that will take political and societal willpower. That's it for this week. Just time to give a quick shout out to some brand new supporters of the channel contributing $10 or more a month at our Patreon page. They are John Paterson, Robert Persons, Joshua Sibleys, Dan Morgan, Des Rousseau-Alain, Steve Morris and Alan Jones. A huge thank you to those folks and to everyone else who's joined the Just Have a Think project at Patreon this week. If you want to get involved and influence the direction of the channel with monthly polls to choose future programmes and Patreon exclusive content, then you can do just that at www.patreon.com/justhaveathink. And of course you can show your support for the channel absolutely free of charge by subscribing and hitting the little bell icon so that you're notified when new content gets published each week. Dead easy to do that, of course. Just click on the link below or on that icon there. As always, thanks very much for watching. Have a great week and remember to just have a think. See you next week.